I hope you're all enjoying the Deploy conference. I'm Suzanne Pherigo. I'm a Senior Director of Engineering here at DigitalOcean. And my talk today is focused on the journey from startup to sustainability, best practices for engineering in times of transition. I've been at DigitalOcean for just over 3.5 years. And during that time, we've seen tremendous change. We've gone from a private to a public company. We've more than doubled in size. And we've had to make significant changes along the way to ensure we can continue to grow and be successful. So I'm hopeful you're going to get some insights out of this talk to help you realize when change is needed in your own organizations, what changes to make, and how to implement them successfully. In my over 2 decades of managing engineering organizations, I've been in situations where teams and organizations are growing and other situations where they're shrinking. Change is needed in both cases, but I'll tell you, it's more fun in the growth times. And so today we're going to focus on change in those high growth kind of times. As you're growing, new people are coming in. You might even be one of them. And people are maybe looking around and saying, wow, I can't believe we do things like this, or who came up with such a horrible process? What you've got to step back and realize is this way and these processes are what made you successful. Yes, it probably is time to change, but don't forget that most of these changes are required because you are successful. If your processes and ways of doing things were horrible, you wouldn't have gotten the success. You might not even be here if you're one of those new people. So just keep this in mind as we go through this talk, that the previous decisions and ways of doing things were not wrong. But now you have a different organization and a different set of problems, so you need a different way of doing things. I've categorized the change opportunities into 3 different categories: people, processes, and code. They overlap, so don't get stuck on where things fall. For example, I might think tribal knowledge is a people thing, whereas you might think of it more as a process thing. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that you just look at all 3 of these categories to find change opportunities. And we're going to go into more detail on each of them as we go along. Another key thing to remember is that this is a journey. Change should not be considered a one and done kind of thing. It needs to be an ordinary part of your doing business and not an extraordinary event. Along this journey, there's quick jaunts and then some longer term expeditions. The quick jaunts are things that you can think about at every retro and part of your normal conversations. They're typically small tweaks that you can implement immediately. For example, if you're hiring a lot of new people, every time you hire somebody in and have them go through the onboarding process, ask them how you can improve that process for the next person. And then you're making those minor changes and tweaks as you go along. Or if in every sprint you're spending significant time in manual, repeatable processes, maybe it's time to think about automating some of those processes. So continually ask what you can stop doing, start doing, do more of, do less of. In addition to these quick jaunts, there's the longer term expeditions. These typically take a little more thought and research, and you need more people vested in those changes. Technical debt is a big one. As your code is aging, you need to step back every few months to review your code base and figure out what needs to be refreshed. Role change is another elephant in the room that needs to be talked about, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail later. But don't walk away from those elephants in the room. To make your change successful, you've got to be willing to talk about topics that maybe are hard for some people. So make time for these longer term expeditions. Make them a part of your doing business along with the quick jaunts. Maybe you want to put something just on the calendar every month or every 6 weeks to go through a topic to make sure that you're continuing to talk about what needs to change and what you need to focus on. So now we're going to get into each of the categories in a bit more detail, and I'm going to start with the people side, because this is often the hardest part of change, and it's sometimes glossed over. What you might consider a small change could have a big impact to somebody else's day-to-day. And if they don't understand it, or quite frankly, even if they do, they're likely to resist it. Remember that important concept about the prior decisions were often not bad or wrong. If you approach people that way, rather than telling them that they were wrong and you have to fix them, they're more likely to meet you in the middle and not dig in and get angry and quit just when you might need them the most. So remember that we're changing because we are successful. Another thing you need to think about with people is that there's a lot of people that put their value into what they know and who they know. The number of the connections within the company is likely increasing as your company becomes more successful, and it's harder for people to connect with everybody personally anymore. But a lot of these people that have been here for the long term see that taking away knowledge, and they feel that that is taking away power. Sometimes this manifests itself in them not wanting to document the things that they're expert in. I've seen this happen where people will give you all kinds of excuses about why they don't want to document what they know. This is not sustainable, and it's not in your best interest. If they leave, the knowledge leaves with them. So you need to give them a way to make them not feel like their value is diminished. For example, if you have them develop and deliver training as part of the onboarding process, they can still be seen as the expert for the new people coming in and going through that onboarding, but now they've disseminated the information a little bit better. Or find new areas for them to expand their expertise. But don't eliminate all tribal knowledge. A lot of your culture and relationships and nuances are embedded in tribal knowledge and how they're passed around the organization. So be deliberate about what you document, but don't feel like you have to document every little piece of everything that everybody knows. Roles evolution is another big component in the people side of change. Often there are new roles that are coming in. For example, you might not have used technical program managers before, or you might now have an architect that's working across different groups and that has the ability to impact the technology used and developed in teams. What's often overlooked is that these new roles will likely change the old roles. And people, if they don't understand that, they'll see this new person moving in on their turf and they won't like it, and they're likely to resist it. So you need to be very open about communicating about the new roles and resetting expectations on how people work together. Another thing you need to think about is you need to have fully functioning teams as you grow rather than individual heroes. This is sometimes hard for the heroes who built the business. But as you grow, you can't have one person that drives all product development, fixes all issues, keeps all the knowledge and decisions. You need consistency and team power, which means you need to hire for that as well. So it might be time to modify your interviewing and hiring process to make sure you're growing the right capabilities for tomorrow instead of hiring for yesterday. And I can't stress enough that you need to communicate too much. People need to understand the value of change, even if they don't feel like it's good for them personally. I'm not advocating you turn into a cheerleader and everything is wonderful kind of person, because that's not the way to build trust. You have to be honest with people. You have to communicate about how things are changing and why. Some people might not fit anymore, and that's okay, because negative people are never good for the long term, and they need to find a better place suited for their needs. If you're not communicating, though, it often takes a lot longer before you and they realize that that change is needed. So now let's talk about processes. Processes impact your development lifecycle as well as solutions for customer needs and business goals. Likely, as you're growing, you need more process because you have a more complex organization. but don't try to grow too far ahead of where you are, because heavy bloated processes that are designed for an organization twice the size you are today are just going to slow you down right now. So grow with the organization and not too far ahead of it. It's probably time to examine your manual versus automated processes. When you're starting, you often start with manual processes, especially things that are fast, easy, and rare to do. For example, in DO, we used to have a manual process for our month close. We manually initiated invoice generation for all users. We manually initiated credit card charges. We manually verified results, etc. At the beginning, this wasn't a big deal, but the time spent in those manual processes kept growing, as did the opportunities for errors. It was gated on someone doing the right thing at the right time every month. So we automated it. Now there's no engineering time spent on that each month. The process completes in a few hours rather than several days. You also might want to examine your approach to standard versus custom solutions. At the beginning, some companies take the approach of, we have a few customers, it's easier to give them exactly what they want, and so they develop very custom solutions, but then they find that this doesn't scale as their customer base grows. Or they might take a different approach of focused on providing just one solution without realizing that minor tweaks might bring more and different customers. So your approach here is really tied to how you satisfy business objectives, and it goes beyond engineering, but it's worth engineering thinking about as well as you're working with the rest of the organization. A DO example here is around droplet sizes. We're always trying to figure out the right droplet sizes without going too crazy on the number of options. Decision-making is key in any organization. Who owns the decision? Who can say yes or no? Veto power is a big deal. As roles change, a big part of the role change is who gets to be involved in which decisions, and clarity here is key, because this likely changes as your roles are changing and the people are changing. And I've seen situations where decisions get stalled because either nobody feels like they have the power to say yes, or everybody feels like they have the power to say no. So this is a very critical area where you need to have clear owners and make sure you're communicating clearly. Then your code is another area that might need to change. When you're starting out, teams and sometimes even just individuals own the decisions about what languages to use, what tools to use, what design patterns to use. This can get out of control as you grow. Knowledge sharing is hard, code sharing is hard, people moving between teams is hard, and you're probably spending too much on licensing and support for different technologies doing pretty much the same thing. In DO, we used to let every team pick whatever CI/CD system they wanted to use. We ended up going to a preferred solution. There was a lot of grumbling, but there was a lot of value in that too. As we were locking down the processes around compliance to become a public company, it went much smoother having one CI/CD system than having every team have their own. As your code base is growing, you might have abandoned code that nobody understands or owns. This is a problem when the code is not used. It causes bloat and time for people to understand it as part of your system. It's even worse though when the code is critical. So you might have a critical piece of code that nobody's touched in a year and the person who knew anything about it has left. If nobody understands or owns that code and you have a problem, it's going to turn into a crisis. So you need to be seeking out and assigning those pieces of code. You need to formalize more your knowledge sharing and know what the other teams are doing so you're not solving the same problem multiple times. It might be time to have a shared architectural view and talking about shared services in the organization, things that maybe were just not even thought about when you were small because everybody talked to everybody and knew what everybody else was doing, but now need to be formalized as you've grown larger. And then back to ownership, we talked about abandoning code. Shared custody for code doesn't work either. So if you have multiple teams claiming ownership for a piece of code, Usually this fails because nobody really owns the whole thing, and things will fall between the cracks when you have problems. So make sure that, like, you don't have abandoned code, you actually have code that's not owned by multiple teams, but is real clear ownership of one team. So I've gone through the 3 categories. I've hopefully given you some ideas of where you can start looking for things that you need to change. But another key element of this is that you've got to kickstart the change. You can't be continuing to kick the can down the road and say, "I will worry about it later. We're busy now." You've got to start making this a part of your business discussions, your day-to-day discussions. Never be satisfied with the status quo. You need to start doing the regular retros, or at least if you're doing those, put this change conversation into those regular retros. You need to do the deep dives. You need to be looking for areas to improve. Another key thing is to make sure you ask everybody. New people often have different perspectives than people that have been here a long time, or different functions like support have different perspectives on what's working and what's not working. If you only talk to the people in your direct team, you're not going to get a comprehensive view of how things are working and what really needs to change. Communicate more than you think is necessary. If you're in this conversation all day, every day, you think it's a big deal, people might hear it as a blip. And if you don't communicate more and more, they're going to think it's going to go away and they're not going to worry about it. So don't worry about over communicating, worry about under communicating. And remember, this is a continuous learning, continuous changing environment that you're trying to build. The need to change is not going to end. If you have a change-oriented environment, you're going to be able to react quickly and effectively to all kinds of unexpected situations. Yesterday's decisions might not work for today, and today's decisions might not work for tomorrow. So you've got to keep changing in order to stay relevant. Continuously learn, be curious, listen. You're almost never the smartest person in the room on all topics. I know I owe any successes I've had to the smart people around me, the teams I've been part of, the teams I've managed. We've evolved people, processes, and code in the 3.5 years I've been here at DO, and I certainly didn't come up with all the answers, but I helped provide some of the frameworks to have the discussions about what needed to change and why, and then let the smart people in the room help generate the solutions. Even putting together this presentation, I spent time with some of the people I trust and learn from to hopefully be able to give you some ideas about how to advance your own organizations that will work effectively for you. So don't ever let titles or hierarchies get in the way. Listen and learn and make the impacts you can based on that. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for listening. Please head over to Discord if you have any questions or want to continue the discussion. I hope you're enjoying Deploy, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference as well. Thank you.